Hi, I'm Mayor Tim Kant of Fairhope, Alabama. I've been a resident of Fairhope since 1977. My parents moved down from New Jersey to Spanish Fort in 1967. In 1967, my father was involved with the screens that were working with the paper mills, and that's how I was 12 at the time, and that's how I ended up in Fairhope in the immediate area. Why did we choose Alabama? It was a choice between Alabama and Oregon. Of course, having relatives on the East Coast, it was easier for my family to commute and visit and keep up with family instead of going to Oregon. And I'm glad at the end of the day they did so, or I wouldn't have been in this beautiful state of Alabama. What kind of work did they do once they arrived? My mom was a homemaker, and my father, like I said, was a general manager of a company that actually made the screens for the paper mills. And the paper industry, up to recent years, was a major provider of workforce in the area. And since they were weaving these screens, the company thought best to move the business from Belleville, New Jersey, which you would think why they were so far away from the actual users of these screens. I think they decided it was, and therefore moved to South Alabama. Here, generations done the same thing, or why not? Over the years, my grandfather was in the import-export business of pecans and nuts, and so it was interesting because when my grandfather came down, we were able to share stories with a lot of the nut producers in the area, because Alabama, especially South Alabama, have a lot of pecans that they imported and exported. So he knew all the players. So I thought that was interesting to know the grandfather, and then of course his immediate family was from the New England area, and how we were connected, because a lot of the people that were in the pecan business, especially Alton Shermer, who was a large producer of pecans, actually was right here in Fairhope. And actually we moved his business, and we built our new library on that location, and we still recognize him of doing so. And one little side note about Alton Shermer, it was his generosity that actually allowed us to have our first and only rose garden in Fairhope, Alabama. Why did we settle here or not move somewhere else? I think once we got here, I guess like a lot of people, you were surprised, the beauty of the Mobile Bay, and being one of the highest points along, and the people were so friendly. You know, a lot of times when we would tell people we were moving to Alabama, they would look surprised, because so many stereotypes are that we're backwards or so forth. But in Fairhope, Alabama, we're real progressive, and we've always done things a little different, and we tried to stay ahead of the pace. And I think that's what kept us in this area along the eastern shore of Mobile Bay. We had all the luxury of living in the country and working and being with people, and then we were just a stone throw away from going across the bay to a larger city, which was Mobile. And so I think that was the reason we never did move off after my father passed away. And my mom still lives here today, and she could have probably moved to Florida or other places where our family have relocated over the years. So I think it goes to the fact that Alabama, once you get, especially to Fairhope, you end up coming back. A lot of people went to school here and graduated Fairhope High School like myself, and then they go off and actually do a whole career, and then end up moving back to the Fairhope area because it brought back so many memories, and all those memories they still remember today. And I think that's a tribute to what we try to do in this area. Our journey as a story, I think when you look at the evolution of business and where jobs were being created, people were moving to cities, and whether you were moving to New York or Chicago or these other cities were metropolitans is where the jobs were located. So I really believe our journey was no different than any others, other than we went a little bit further distance. The early settlers of Fairhope actually moved from Iowa and Chicago area to come south to start up and actually get started. But you know, we were right outside a larger city, and I think that has a lot to do when you relocate or start up. And our journey, I would suspect, is no different than anybody else's. You were actually moving your family where you could actually make a living from the businesses. So many people were moving from the farming industry into the industrial movement, and that's the reason you see a lot of the migration of families into the inner cities. Experience, minor experience is most different, and why? I don't think our differences are a whole lot different. I think that most people are family oriented. They actually want to make sure they have a decent salary where they can actually support their families, and also have friends and actually have same ideas. And I think when you actually move to an area that you try to pick the same likes, whether you go to the First Baptist Church or you go to the Unitarian Fellowship Hall. It's all about gathering on Sunday. And I think that diversity is what attracts so many people. Let's see what else. Recent Alabama immigrants. Before we get to the immigration, I've been fortunate because in Fairhope alone, since we've been known as the best retirement community since '92 for a lot of our seniors, that has attracted so many people from Fortune 500 companies to just all kinds of cross-section of citizens from around the country and around the world. And when you bring all those people into one location of a community of about 16,000, you can see the dynamic of people thinking and doing, and that in itself makes the uniqueness of this particular Fairhope. I don't think you'll see that in a lot of other Alabama cities, maybe in some of the larger metropolitan areas. But when you have that talent and those ideas coming into a community, it really opens your eyes. And I think that's why it's such an attractive location to actually come here. And having played a small part with that, being part of Fairhope since 1983, before I actually ran for mayor in 2000, I believe that's what we tried to carry on, because we don't want to be like everywhere else. We want that uniqueness, but also keep the friendly atmosphere of what we're about in Fairhope, is helping and working with each other and making us the best place we can live. And from time to time, that is a challenge. The immigration, we've had a large debate on the national scene about immigration. I wish they would go back and actually do the history, because I suspect if we went back in time, when after World War I and World War II, when all our immigrants were coming from Germany and Italy and Europe, it was probably the same percentage when you look at population-wise. Then we had, before the Japanese and the Asian coming in, and to me, now we're talking about the Mexican or the Spanish Americans. Everybody agrees we ought to do it legally and do it correct, but at the end of the day, to say we don't want free borders and allow people to come and go, I think it's a tribute to the fact that people want to come to this country. There's so many countries I think they would rather leave in a heartbeat if they could. So therefore, we need to figure out how we can work together and learn from each other, because the hardest working people I've known when I lived in New Jersey as a young boy, my father was a worker, and when I can see the Italians and the different ethnic groups within the Puerto Ricans and so forth, it was pretty obvious when you lived outside of New York, because that's where we lived. You understand how people are, and they're no different. They just it's easier to meet and be together because it's what you believe and what you're about. That's why you had neighborhoods of Little Italy and so forth. And I think it's a disservice to our country if we take that knowledge away from being able to grow to the next generation, because there's so much knowledge we can learn from one another. And by saying we're not going to allow that knowledge to continue, I think it's a disservice not only to our children, but to generations to come. So surely we can figure out how to work together so we can all live together, because I believe that's the strength as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Well, hello, my name is Barry Gaston. I'm 65 years old. I am the great-grandson of E.B. Gaston, the founder of Fairhope, and I guess growing up as a kid, everything seems perfectly normal. Who knows that we're maybe on the cusp of something happening here. I had no idea I was growing up in a social experiment or a part of anything like that. Growing up in Fairhope was wonderful. I got to go to the organic school where my father had gone and my grandmother had taught, and didn't appreciate at the time what a unique and wonderful experience that was. Learned a lot. I'm still an active potter as a result of skills I learned at organic in first grade, and some other enamel work, metal work, stuff like that. Enjoyed folk dancing and singing, all the things which seem perfectly normal. Go someplace today and it probably seems a bit strange. But growing up in Fairhope wasn't special. It was just, you know, a normal childhood. I think growing up here, we probably didn't know what we had, just as I wonder if I'm sure the children growing up in the Alps don't look out at the mountains and marvel at their beauty every day, but you know, you get accustomed to it and you don't realize what great people you're around and what great people were raising us. I'm glad that my predecessor settled here. I guess it looked like a wonderful place then, even though it was densely overgrown. Some had been clear cut, but I'm glad they chose it because there's just nothing nicer than Mobile Bay. My great-grandfather came, his family, my dad, my parents stayed here. We've lived here until recently, took a move to Mobile for a while. Moving to Mobile shows a great example of the benefits of the single tax colony, which is a really interesting concept. But Mobile is called the city of, often called by those of us who live there as the city of perpetual potential. And when you go downtown now, you see a lot of empty buildings. They've been empty for a long time, and the owners are pretty much slumlords who are just waiting for the thing to turn around, for the community to develop so they can profit on their holdings. If we'd had something like a single tax over there, that probably wouldn't be the case. So I think that's a great testimony to what they were trying to do here and the economic theories they were trying to prove. Other than Mobile, I've lived all my life here on the Gulf Coast. So my family hasn't really had a journey to speak of so far. We've raised here, I have 4 children, one of which still lives here in Fairhope with her children, and that's great, and they love it. The thing I miss about Fairhope, and I didn't know this until I had moved away, or had moved away because it seemed to be losing its funkiness. I go to the great cities that we love, Asheville and Austin and places like that, and they all celebrate their weirdness or their funkiness. And I wish we could do that here because I miss it. I just miss that. Fairhope's always been a town to which people were moving in as long as I was a kid. We'd always hear people say they were ready. The last one to move in always wanted to build a fence and be the last one to move in. They're still coming in, and that's great. But somewhere along the line, I think we lost the respect that we had for the artists and the unusual people. And you know, as a kid, we walked down Main Street barefoot. I don't think I'd feel comfortable doing that anymore. We've gotten a bit dressy. So, but it's still a wonderful town, and I love it. I'm grateful to have the lineage that I have and the parents that I had. and I'm grateful to have experienced Fairhope. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Catherine King. I live in Fairhope, Alabama. And my story is, everyone has their own unique story. I was born in Sylacauga, Alabama, which is in the central part of the state, kind of midway between Birmingham and Montgomery. And I guess it was kind of a unique upbringing. My father's family partially owned the Alabama marble quarries. Alabama marble is the most beautiful marble in the world. It's beautiful, white, creamy marble. And my grandfather, who was born in 1881, came down from Washington, D.C., and with his partners purchased this marble quarry. And many of the most beautiful buildings in our nation's capital, including the Lincoln Memorial, are made out of Alabama marble. And so I grew up on the banks of a deep marble quarry. And it was a unique village. It was called Gant's Quarry, after Dr. Gant, who established the quarries in the 1850s. And we had crushers, and we had dynamite exploding to uncover more marble. I know each day at noon the whistle blew, and then the dynamite exploded so that more marble could be exposed and carved out of the earth and taken into the refining mills and the polishing areas of the marble quarry. So there were 4 owners of the Alabama marble quarry, and my grandfather was one of them. And we lived there until 1964. I was born in 1953, and by 1964 the Alabama Marble Company was purchased by the Georgia Marble Company. And my father decided to move to South Alabama. So that's how we got in this area of the state. He loved to fish, and we had other family members already here. So we lived on the Fish River for a summer. We lived in Foley for a couple of years, and by 1966, we moved here to Fairhope. On my mother's side of the family, she was she had an interesting life. She was from the Midwest. Both her parents came from Illinois, and one was of Irish extraction, and her mother was more of German-Danish extraction. And her parents met, but my grandfather on my mother's side was in the dairy business. He was an ice cream man. And this was during the Depression when she was born, and my grandfather said, "You always had a nickel for an ice cream cone." So they never really went without, because my grandfather always had a job. But he also had wanderlust, and so they went from place to place. And recently we had a gathering for my mother's 80th birthday, and so we revisited her history. And she lived in all sorts of places throughout the Midwest and in the South growing up, and she has all these interesting stories about grandfather going ahead to the new town where his new job was, and then calling or telegraphing for my grandmother to bring my mother and sister and ultimately the little baby brother to the new town. She remembers going to Columbus, Mississippi for one of my grandfather's jobs, and they went on the train, of course, and there was a great flood during that time, and my mother remembers that the train had to just inch along while the railroad, the people who worked for the railroad had to walk the track to make sure that the track had not washed away. So all these little interesting stories, but she really lived in many different places throughout the Midwest and South growing up, including some towns in Texas, and talking about the sandstorms that she experienced, which of course is something we don't have here in South Alabama. By 1947, my grandfather moved to Sylacauga, and my mother, of course, moved with them. And by that time, I think they had lived in maybe 10 or 12 different towns, and she was only 16. So she had a different type of experience. She had lived in several large cities, or large at that time. And so going to the small town of Sylacauga was certainly unique. And so she met my aunt, my father's sister, and they became close friends, and ultimately she met my father, and they married and lived there until in Sylacauga Gant's Quarry until 1966. 1964, and then we moved to South Alabama. Of course, living in South Alabama is absolutely wonderful. There's so many great things to do and such a marvelous history. Since I retired, I was director of admissions at University of South Alabama, but since my retirement, I've been involved in a lot of volunteer activities at different museums, the Mobile Museum of Art, the Gulf Coast Explorium, and now I'm very involved here at the Fairhope Museum of History. And it's just remarkable how Baldwin County was developed very, very uniquely. You think of the city of Mobile right across the bay being an old established city starting in 1702, and the same thing for Pensacola being an old town. But here in Baldwin County, the communities just were not established really until the latter part of the 19th century. And Fairhope, of course, is quite unique. Its history of these very intelligent, brave, courageous, unique, thoughtful people who came down to try to start an experimental town based on a theory. And they executed the theory, they made plans, and they made it work. And here we are today in Fairhope. So it's a delightful place to live. Alabama is a most unique state, both geographically and culturally. Here in the south part of the state, we are much, much different than the rest of the state. Geographically, our river system is second to none, and it developed the communities along the river systems, which, you know, we talk about today with the plantation era and that sort of thing. So, I'm not really sure what else I have to say, but I certainly hope the project goes well, and I appreciate being a part of it. So thank you very much.
How long have you been here? When were you born?
I was born in
Look at the camera. 1926.
1926, June 11th.
Okay. And how and why did your parents come here?
My parents came here from Czechoslovakia, and they came here to get better jobs. They didn't have very good jobs in the Czech Republic, so they came here. Mama met Daddy in Wisconsin, and somehow she got asthma real bad, and so the doctor said they should move to down south. So my dad had some friends that lived in Fairhope, Alabama, and they said to come here to Fairhope so that she would get rid of her asthma. And so they moved here in 1922. My brother was 2 years old, and my sister was 6, I believe.
They were born where?
They were born in Wisconsin, in Cudahy.
So they chose Alabama because?
The doctor told them really they should have moved to where? Arizona. But they had some people that they knew here. Their names were Crickajik, which means little tailor in English.
So they moved here because there was like a Czech community here already, right?
There was some Czechs here already, yes. And so then my dad had bought 2 mules, and we went to church, to the Catholic church, on a wagon to the church in Fairhope, which was about 3 miles from where my dad had bought some property. East Fairhope, on Highway 13. Then it was just called Oberg Road.
Dirt road?
It was a dirt road. And so then,
What kind of work did your father do?
then my dad started farming. he bought from Stapleton's. Stapleton's lived on 104. There was a whole family there that owned so much land around here. So he bought some land from Stapleton's. He bought about 60 or 80 acres, 60 I think. And he bought 2 mules from this people in Point Clear. I remember first he bought a rickety old truck, one of those, I forgot what you call them, Model Ts. And he had me he made it was a little car, but he made it into a pickup. And so I had to sit in the back, and he went to get the mules in Point Clear. So I had to sit in back of the pickup to make sure that the mules won't get
You held on
loose.
to the mules.
Yes. And so then we went to church on the wagon. Daddy used the mules to take us to church on the wagon. And then later on, he bought a tractor, and he bought a car. He bought a car from Clumps.
What kind of farming did he do? Then he started farming and raising chickens, what?
Yeah, first he raised a whole lot of chickens, and then he started farming. He planted sweet potatoes and Irish potatoes and soybeans. He farmed, he had 40 acres, colony land, about 3 miles from us, and he farmed that, and I helped on the farm, my sister and I. I had an older sister, Mary, and I had a brother, Rudy, and then my younger sister, Albina. And we had to work on the farm just like boys, my 3 girls. Daddy wanted some boys, but he just got 1 boy.
Tell him about picking potatoes and picking up the help.
Yeah, we had to, I had to help pick potatoes. I was the checker, you called them. We went to, where's that place?
Loxley?
No,
No, oh, Belforest.
Belforest, to pick up some black people to help us pick potatoes. And so they picked potatoes, and I was the checker. I'd put their name down and a number by it, and then every time they got a basket full, they would call out their number, and I would put a check by their name. And so we did that for many years. I remember one time, I wasn't quite 16 yet. My dad made me drive a whole big truckload of potatoes to Loxley. I was just about 16, and he made me go get a driver's license. So I drove all the way to Loxley. This big load of Irish potatoes.
So why did y'all stay here and not move anywhere else, do you think?
We didn't want to move anywhere else. We liked Fairhope. Most of all, my sister and I loved going to the bay, to the beach, and go swimming. When we were little, Daddy would take us, he'd go buy groceries, and he'd drop us off at the bay first.
And how old were you then?
I was about 10, my sister was 8, and we'd swim, and then Daddy'd motion for us to come in, and we just loved Fairhope Bay. We swam about 3-4 times a week. But first, before we could go, we had to pick a whole bunch of figs. My dad planted about 4 big fig trees in our backyard, so we had to pick some figs first before we could go to the bay. Yeah.
So y'all didn't move anywhere else in the state? Y'all stayed right here, right?
We stayed here, yeah, we didn't move anywhere.
Do you think, how typical was your family's journey? Do you think there were a lot of people that went through the same thing that you did, or not? Or a lot of Czech people did
I
the same
think-
thing y'all did?
Yes, I think so. There was a lot of them in Robertsdale and Silver Hill. There was so many Czechoslovakians there, even this other nationality, I forgot what they're called.
Polish, Swedish,
No,
German?
German, yeah. And,
They all come about the same time, or a lot earlier than y'all, or what?
well, some of them came earlier, but I can't hardly. Dobrava was one of them, and Shishlocks were here. They were, what do you call them? Slovaks. They were Slovaks. Shishlocks and Forgotches and Urbanics, they were all Slovaks, but we were Czechoslovak. It's a little bit maybe like talking the Southerners, how they talk compared to the Northerners. And
What else did you like about Fairhope?
oh, I loved Fairhope. It was such a beautiful little town. Yeah, I loved the school. They had a great big school up to 6th grades. And you know what? Later on, they tore it down. And it was still good. They tore it down. It was awful that they tore down that beautiful school. I loved school. I made A's all the way through school until I quit in the 9th grade. That was foolish, but I did. I quit in the 9th grade. Daddy wanted me to help because he had a lot of chickens, and he would sell eggs in Mobile. He'd take the eggs to Mobile, so I helped him take care of the chickens and plus farming.
Hey, Lane, I just want you to know that we're not really rushed. You don't have anybody behind her right now. You're satisfying the needs of the project. But if you want to use this to get family stories, just because you'll have this on DVD, take your time. We're perfectly happy with
All
that.
right, tell us about how you met Dad.
Oh, I met Dad when my sister and I were skating at Burkell's. Was it Burkell?
Yeah.
Burkell's. These, down at the bay. These two Navy boys were on leave from Corey Field in Florida.
Pensacola.
Pensacola, yeah. And they came walking in, and they naturally started talking to us. And so he wanted my name and address, so he started writing to me. So we wrote to each other for a long time, and then we started dating, and
Then you got married. He was from where?
he was from Ohio, McDermott, Ohio, and we started dating, and then we got married in 44, September the 11th. September the 11th, we got married, and he was going to try to be a baseball player. He loved baseball, so he went to this town in Alabama somewhere to try to play baseball, but his right arm was hurting so bad he couldn't do it. His arm was hurting so bad from pitching so much when he was in school, and so then he worked at the H&W Hollingworth and Whitney paper mill. First he worked with my dad for 5 years, and Dad built us a house right next to where my dad lived, and so then he didn't like farming, so he went to work at paper mills, Scott Paper Mill, yeah. And we had 3 children, Lottie and David and Jeff, and
Well, tell us about your mother. She had asthma real bad.
my mother had asthma so bad, so very bad. Dad used to work for this man that lived behind us on a dirt road, Mr. Normantis, and he used to work for him. And so when it was time for Dad to walk home, we'd run to meet him, and he'd say, "Is your mother still alive?" She had asthma so very, very bad. The rest of her life, she had asthma.
She was how much older?
She was 9 years older than Daddy. I don't know. Daddy didn't think that would matter, but later on in years it did matter because, you know, he was 50 and she was just 41.
And
Huh?
All right, anything else you want to say about Fairhope growing up? Halloween, anything, what y'all did at Christmas or anything like that when you were little? Christmas time?
Oh, we had a good time at Halloween, and just at school. we didn't do anything at home about Halloween. But at school, we had Halloween parties, and one time, what's his name? What was his name?
What was his name? I don't remember.
Over Christmas, we drew names. You know, one person got a name to buy a present, and Claude Andrews bought me this beautiful little doll. She was made out of porcelain, and I was hurrying down the steps. The school had real steel steps, and I was hurrying to hurry up and show Mama, and I dropped the doll, and it broke into 100 pieces. I just cried and cried. And then this one mean boy, I had a mask for Halloween. Daddy let me buy a mask, and it had a nose that kind of stuck out. It was an owl, and this mean boy from high school I was getting ready to get on the bus, and he came by and tore the nose off of the mask. Oh, I just hated him. Oh, gosh.
Tell them what you did at Christmas for your family, what your mother did.
Oh, at Christmas time, Mama set the whole table with everything, even his billfold and all kind of wonderful food. And so Mama would, and we had cream of wheat, and Mama would go to each one and put her thumb in some honey and put a cross on our forehead to bless us. And then my sister made fudge, chocolate fudge, and we ate all that Christmas Eve. We didn't hardly believe in Santa Claus, my sister and I. I don't know, they didn't have us believe in Santa Claus. But we had a good Christmas Eve and Christmas morning. We went to church early. Yeah.
Tell us about how scared you were of Frankenstein.
Oh my gosh. We went to the movies.
How old were you then?
I was about 10 maybe. We went to the movies and saw the
Downtown Fairhope, right?
yeah, downtown Fairhope, to the theater, and there was a movie. They had two movies on. First we went. Let me tell you about Greer's. There was a Greer store just around the corner from where the drugstore is, and they would give us, when Daddy bought a certain amount of groceries, they'd give us tickets to go see the movie. So then we went to see the movie pretty often, and there was this movie. It was The Invisible Man and Frankenstein, and my sister and I were so afraid of that Frankenstein. He was so ugly.
And your brother,
He always got up and act like Frankenstein. He'd make this awful noise, and one time he had me cornered in the kitchen. He was coming after me like Frankenstein, and I wet my pants. It scared me so bad. I hate Frankenstein. I will not watch any movies with Frankenstein, and neither will my sister. My sister and I we played so good together.
so what do you think about the immigrants that are coming to America now, the Mexicans and all the other people? Do you think they're having as hard a time as y'all did, or?
Well, yeah, they're having a hard time to find jobs and to prove that they can work here and behave. And
Do you think that they have anything in common with what happened to y'all? I mean, do you think they're going through the same kind of stuff that y'all did, hardships?
probably so. I think they're having hardships like my dad and mother did. See, they didn't know each other in Czechoslovakia. They met in Karahi, and Daddy knew that she was 9 years older, but she was real pretty, and he said that really didn't matter. But then later in their life, it did matter, because he was 50 and she was 59, so that mattered.
So do you think the immigrants are having a harder time than you did, or not as hard a time as your family did?
I think they're having a pretty hard time too. I guess that's about it.
My name is Sherry Sullivan. I live here in Fairhope, Alabama, and I have been here. My daughter is a fifth-generation Fairhopian, as we like to call it. My grandparents moved here from Washington County. Actually, my great-great-grandparents came here from Washington County. My great-great-grandfather ran moonshine in Washington County and got in some trouble with the law, as you can imagine, and they moved to Fairhope, and that's how my family came to Fairhope. And we've always been in Alabama. I did have some relatives who moved from Fairhope to New York, but pretty much everybody has stayed in Alabama. And my grandfather was in the military, worked over at Brookley Field, and my father followed in his footsteps and went into the Army and moved to, was at Fort Benning in Columbus, Georgia, and that's how he met my mother and brought her here from Columbus, Georgia to Fairhope to raise their family. And they have 3 daughters, and we all live here in town. So, and all my nieces and nephews are here. So it's a great place to live, great place to raise a family, and we're all here just enjoying the fruits of our former generation's labor. Okay, let's see. I think the thing that about my family living here that I like the most is just my dad being able to tell stories of old Fairhope and running through the gullies and remembering buildings that are still here and what they used to be and how the bakery used to be downtown, and being able to share those stories with my daughter and my nieces and nephews and to make them appreciate the history of Fairhope a little bit, not just, the town and how it was, but the people and the characters here and how they influenced what Fairhope is today, and how our, the forefathers or the people who settled in Fairhope really inspired each other to, and inspired other people to be creative and to think outside the box and to be, do things for your neighbor and to be helpful. And I think that has carried over from generation to generation. And to me, that's what makes living in Alabama, because I think as a Southerner, you have those traits, but I think they're even more so in Fairhope because we have such a great community. I guess, most of my family's still here, so we haven't moved around to other parts of the state. And, but, I think we all stay here because there is so much family here and because we love the community and love what Fairhope stands for. And I think that's why a lot of people migrate to this part of the country, the South in particular, because of the image that it is portrayed to be so friendly and to be hospitable and, for people to care about one another and take care of each other. And I think that is why a lot of people choose to come to America and also Alabama. And I think we're always willing to lend a hand. And I think that says a lot for the people who live here and who, they'll take care of their neighbors. Okay. And I think, again, Fairhope being so eclectic in the people that they attracted a long time ago, I think that's, reflective today because we have so many people from different backgrounds and different cultures coming to Fairhope and to the state of Alabama. And just, to America in general, but Fairhope in particular, because it did take a very forward-thinking, diverse group of people to come here and make our community what it is. And I think that's, again, why people move here and why they appreciate what we have and appreciate people from all walks of life and all backgrounds.
Okay. I am Charles Torrey. I'm the youngest grandson and grandchild of Oswald and Martha Foster, who came here in 1898 as farmers. And they really had come from Germany in the 1870s. My grandfather was born in 1872, my grandmother in 1876. And the reason they came was my grandfather did not want his children involved in another European war. So he brought his sons and his daughter in 1885 to Chicago. That is where my grandparents met and married, and by 98 they were here. Once they got here, my grandfather first tried lumbering and homesteading, and then ultimately about 1910 came here to Fairhope. Here, his business was building any kind of building, including the building we're currently in. Shipping, he built ships during World War I. He helped with the concrete ships, as did my oldest uncle. They built pleasure craft as well. They shipped, the representatives owned the franchise for Gulf Oil or Standard Oil up until 1947. And my grandparents would frequently have company from Chicago. So I remember the German food, the German beverages, and we lived right at the foot of Pier Street, and I still do. And that was where their business was as well as their residence. And in my childhood, I remember the town was very much of an art center. It is today, but not quite on such a personal level as it was then. The organic school taught art, and also it was taught in the public schools as well as folk dancing. And now, today, I'm not aware of that in any school, which is too bad. But things change. The buildings here, a few are recognizable, but very few that I knew as a child still remain, except on Fairhope Avenue between Section and School Street, Church Street rather. So this is what I remember of Fairhope and Mobile, coming back and forth across the old causeway with a lift bridge. And it seemed like it took all day. My aunt's father ran the Bay Queen with his brothers. So that was the way they came back and forth during that time. I hope this will be something that people will find interesting.
I've been in Alabama since about 1959, I think, and we just enjoy being here so much. So we came to Alabama actually from Biloxi, Mississippi, because I was flying in Air Force planes, doing work and training their officers in electronic countermeasures, which was searching for radar and then jamming the radar. So we just had a great time, and one day they said they want to interview you for a job. And I said, oh, and they said, Huntsville, Texas. No, they just said Huntsville. And I said, Texas? The only thing I knew about Texas was a prison. I don't want to go in a prison. So they said, oh, no, Huntsville, Alabama. I never even heard of Huntsville, Alabama. And they said, oh, well, you know, that's where Von Braun and the V2 bunch is located. And they want you to come up there. And I said, well, why? They said, they want you to be interviewed by Dr. Stuhlinger, as assistant to Von Braun on science. So I interviewed with Dr. Stuhlinger, and he said, have you ever heard of a transistor? I said, no, sir. He said, would you like to see one? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, 3 or 4 more questions, and I keep saying, no, sir, no, sir. And I thought, boy, I'm not going to get this job. And he said, the final question, how would you like to come here and develop transistor circuits for us? And I said, yes, sir. So I came up to Huntsville, Alabama, and I started working on transistors. The first one I ever saw. They were only invented in 1948, and you know, that was about 1952. So at least I was telling the truth. So, you know, that's the reason that we settled in Huntsville, Alabama. And then we came down here to Fairhope. And my daughter had came down here and made her own name here in Fairhope, Alabama. And it was such a lovely place. And it got us out of the cold weather in Huntsville. So we were from Louisiana originally, and the climate here is much like Louisiana. So this was a perfect place for us. So, you know, it just goes around that way. And my first grade teacher says she couldn't keep my attention because I was always flying airplanes. So, you know, and so they finally said, well, why don't you just give him an airplane? So she did. And so she got my attention from then on. But after a long period of time, I went to work in Huntsville with Dr. Stuhliner and Von Braun, and I met Von Braun. So the way I met Von Braun is they told me that since I was developing transistors, and I'd already flown the first transistors that flew into space on the Redstone missile in the tilt program. And I had my spares in my pocket when I went down to the Cape. Oh, they'd probably shoot you for that today. But at any rate, I walked out of the blockhouse, and lo and behold, there went the Redstone missile. And I said, tilt, tilt, tilt. Oh, Lord, let it tilt. And finally, I saw the Redstone tilting. Because ballistic missiles, you fire them straight up, and then they got to tilt over into a ballistic trajectory. So I said, thank you, good Lord, for that. So at any rate, it just went on and on and on, and I met so many people. Here's the book that we put together on our interviews and so forth with Von Braun. And my daughter put this together for me, but it was the original things that I'd talked about in the past. And then also, of course, we started out working for the Army, you know, so, but soon enough, we were transferred over to NASA. And then I had the joy and responsibility of teaching the astronauts about the lunar rover, to how to drive it. And if you notice, the wheels are made of piano wire. Also on the moon, we didn't know at that time whether it was going to sink up and disappear or not. But there I'm shaking hands with one of the astronauts that I helped train, and he went on into space, and we left 3 lunar rovers up on the moon, and they're there to this day. Theoretically, all we'd have to do is to take batteries up, put them in, and drive them off. But every time they show a shot on the moon, I'm looking. I said, oh boy, because I've seen a rock that big. I said, they're going to show me those 3 lunar rovers. They never have. But I'm still looking, and that's the way it is, you know. So I've had just a very interesting career in the space program, and oh, this is one of the ones that I like. This was when I had an interview with Dr. Von Braun, and he was interviewing me and my boss and one of my cohorts there. So he gave me a presidential award certificate for my work that I had done. And of course, let's see, this picture here, get these together, was me shaking hands with one of the astronauts, and he just went right on up on the moon with the lunar rovers. Have 3 of them sitting there. All we got to do is, to this day even, is put new batteries in them, and we can drive them off. So I keep looking, and one of these days I'm going to see them on the moon. And then here is a picture of several people. These are astronauts, and I knew them all. And the first man that set foot on the moon, I also met with the last man that put his foot on the moon. Oh, so I tell you, I've been around a long time. That's most my claim to fame is I've just been there for a long time. And these were all of my hierarchy bosses, including Don Van Brown and, oh my goodness, all kind of people. George Miller and Dr. Lucas and Dr. Van Brown and so forth. And they said, our deep appreciation for your outstanding contribution to the Apollo 11, flight to the moon. So that's about the most that I have to say, I guess. Oh my goodness, can't forget this one here. This is Snoopy. This is the astronauts came up with the Snoopy Award, and they gave one to me, and this is he. So, that's the way it goes. So, oh, well, let's see here. I got so much stuff I can't get a hold of all of it, but right here is my most famous one, my lunar rover. I put it through all of its tests, acceptance tests, flight tests, vacuum tests, and then we let it go down on the moon. And we didn't know for sure if we'd ever see it again because we weren't sure how much dust there was on the moon. It might just sink up. But it didn't. And theoretically, even today, we could go up there and put new batteries in it. We got 3 of them up there and drive them off, just going all over. And the outgrowth of this, of course, was the lunar rover that we just landed on Mars. And it's going all over Mars, taking pictures and sending them back. And I watched that intensely. So I guess that's about the sum of my career. So thank you very much.